Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Tricked For. This time, Redemption 2. Yes, Redemption 2. We're seeking redemption. We're seeking redemption. Maybe you'll get some redemption. Speaking of redemption, you can get some redemption. Redeem them. Redeem our maker, our mothership. We're looking at our own redemption. It's All Been in Radio Hour this Saturday. Live Red Herring Theater. Get your tickets. Just go to IABD.com and click tickets at the top. Get those tickets. And now get your ticket to Redemption. Redemption 2 on It's All Been Tricked For.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Trekked Before. Your regular hosts are here.
This is Steven.
And Keith.
Jimmy-Jerome. And we are here to talk Redemption 2, is how it was officially titled. Not Redemption Part 2, just Redemption 2.
Huh.
That is a little odd to me because Best of Both Worlds was just, a season ago and it was called Part 2. And most people refer to this as Part 2, but that's not what it says in the episode title.
Did they mean it to be Redemption 2, like T-O-O?
Yeah, also. Redemption also.
No, it's the Roman numerals for 2. Part 1 didn't have 1 in the title, just like Best of Both Worlds didn't have Part 1 in the title. Yeah.
Right.
I was about to say that within a split second. I was so close to getting that out and then just...
Well, Keith, I hope you'll have time to be redempted as this episode progresses. At least twice. So, first impressions of Redemption 2.
I was interested to see what was going to happen, essentially. I think there was a lot of stuff going on that I liked to find out as it happened. It's hard for me to say how the quality of it is going to hold up, qualitatively compared to everything else in the season, but,
Fall back on this term, a fun episode. I thought there was a lot going on, a lot of good stuff. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I just thought, I like these last couple of seasons when the season ender and the season beginner have just so much crammed in there. And then it's like, oh, I want this every week. And obviously, episodic television back then was different than it is now. But
in what way?
As we said, this looks more to, I just feel like, they cram more into these. Like there's just more going on. They're not afraid to throw more elements, more storylines going on and bringing them together as opposed to our next episode to jump ahead. Where it's just one thing, it's fairly linear. You might get a B plot sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with that either. There's nothing wrong with doing that on TV either. I just feel like maybe, and maybe that's just me that I like it more if there's just more, maybe it's my ADHD that I like more things going on to not distract me, but to, okay, I've had enough of this. Next. Oh yeah. Oh, back to this and back to this. But
yeah, I enjoyed the episode. There were a lot of great elements and little character bits. I'd say my complaint, if I even want to call it that, is there was a lot going on in here, and it almost too much. It was too fractured. It lost sight of what the main story was to the point where it didn't even feel like a part 2. We did have the continuation of the Worf plot from last season, but that season finale was very focused on Worf and Picard. And now all of a sudden we're starting new plots with Data. We're not getting that much of the Duras sisters, unfortunately. And we've got the Sela plot, which really wasn't started in part 1. It was hinted at, but it wasn't started. So we're following a bunch of plots, a lot of them new. So it didn't feel like a part 2 to me. It felt like they were cramming too much and too ambitiously. Whereas if you'd taken this story and spread it over 6 episodes, I think you could have served all of these subplots. I think that's part of the downside of having episodic television. When you try to cram in something big, you really have to cram it in so that you can then go back to your story of the week next week. So yeah, I don't hate it because it's a precursor to what we think of as more serialized storytelling today. And without this kind of episode, we probably wouldn't have gotten there. I can see it as a middle stepping stone, but at the same time, it's frustrating because it can be better, and it will eventually be better in other shows.
I see what you mean about the it's so they can get back to just filling time, essentially.
Filling time. I mean,
no, I know. And this is the phrase I was thinking of when Stephen was talking about the norm for episodic television back then would be, let's get back to our story of the week so we can just kind of fill time throughout the season and then sprinkle in things like this.
And see, I don't think they thought of it as time fillers. While there were some writers that were pushing to get to do the serialized storytelling, because the shows were not based on that back then, it was more like, I think a lot of the people involved in making television considered these like the okay, we'll give them this little leash, but that's not what the show is. This show is these episodic things. And let's tell these individualized stories. That's what the point of the show is to tell these stories. And this is just kind of extra for those other fans that we don't really care as much about because that's not really what the show is. Huh. Whereas now that's totally flopped. So now in Discovery, if they would do a standalone episode, and they have had episodes that felt standalone, but then in retrospect weren't standalone. But if they were doing a standalone now, it would seem like filler. Whereas here, that was the point of the show, and this is more the odd thing out, the outlier.
That is interesting too. I mean, that makes it even more frustrating when you put it that way, and it sounds plausible. Just, I think whenever we get to a point where we can kind of see behind the curtain or guess what's going on behind the curtain, and you think about the executives and what they're doing and why, and it's just you want to just shake them and say, "Look, that's not how things should work." But
so the bright spot I see of this is this episode was written by Ronald D. Moore and Braden Braga uncredited, but the two of them worked on together. And they're the ones that go on the Right Generations to First Contact. Brown and Braga eventually takes over Voyager. Rodney Moore becomes a writer on DS9. So these guys have a big voice in what the shows and the franchise becomes. And I think this type of story is taken in and expanded upon later. I think DS9 does some great serial storytelling, and Voyager does things that are more serialized within the episodic than to a greater extent than TNG does. So
and they're kind of forced to by the format, which is good.
Yeah, these writers are pushing it that way. And so when you get an episode written by them, you're like, okay, I see where it will get to. I appreciate that there were voices pushing it that way back then. I really think the last 3 seasons of Deep Space Nine feel very serialized to me, but we'll get to those
someday.
So we start out. There's a great shot of a dead Klingon with something through his eye, right off the bat. That's a good hook to open on.
Or spear, whichever.
Whatever it was. I thought it was some type of shrapnel or debris. I'm not sure, but I enjoyed it very much.
I'm just saying as opposed to a hook.
Oh,
I was doing it.
See.
Yeah.
Kid. You got me. So we're on Kern's ship. Tony Todd's back as Worf's brother, and Worf's serving on there. And Kern almost immediately shows us that he's a good captain. And you want to root for Worf because he's your main guy, your main character you latch onto. But, Worf's telling him bad advice, and Kern's the one who's got it. And he's got this sun trick that's really, really good. And I'm like, oh, I really appreciate Worf's brother and Tony Todd getting to do something like that.
You guys know I love any slingshot past the sun kind of maneuver. And,
this was more of a bounce off the sun. But
I did kind of suck everyone in, which I thought was cool. That's a great start. I enjoyed it. And, and in service of a much better episode than Tomorrow's Yesterday, but then they do it again in 4, Voyage Home. They use that same slingshot past the sun. But I thought that was a cool start. And the effects were pretty good too.
Yeah.
Effects look pretty good.
I mean, I don't know if I was watching on Blu-ray, so they've been, updated a bit.
Right.
I don't know what you guys watched on, but it looked good to me.
I think Netflix is probably the same thing, essentially, right?
Probably.
Yeah. That's where I'm watching it.
Picard, we get a scene of him schooling these admirals as if he's their commanding officer and he's in charge, and it really feels like he's overstepping his boundaries. I mean, I guess they've tasked him with assembling the fleet, which is great, but he's the one berating them and laying the law down on them in a very harsh manner.
Yeah. I missed the part where they're like, you're in command of all of this. I guess you got a Starfleet message or whatever. And why didn't these other ships already have captains?
Well, they said that
their reasoning.
They talked about them not being ready to be out, but a lot of them were older ships, so I guess they were undergoing renovations rather than being built. But it did feel a little odd to me that they weren't so crude and they had to grab officers, and not just grab officers, but they put Riker and Geordi on the same ship, and I'm like, that seems kind of odd to me as well.
And I agree with you, Jimmy. You were talking earlier about it being 2-packed as much as I liked it being that packed. The Data storyline just seemed worn out, and I was kind of glad they didn't give it more activity other than him, the action he got into. But I'm glad they didn't get even deeper into him and his second in command or whatever, because I was just like, I don't care about. We've done this. We've done this. I just,
I didn't think of it that way. I mean, I think of it now that you say it that way, but I mean, I guess I liked seeing more from him. Whether or not it's consistent with the things that they've shown, they keep backsliding so often. It's hard to say what he can and can't do. But I thought this was a good step forward, showing like, wow, he really is.
No, I enjoyed the data and command. I didn't enjoy I don't think you should be in command.
Of course,
you're not human. Essentially, you're not human argument or whatever. And I guess he was redeemed though at the end. And I was waiting for the moment where the guy who was like, "Oh, you've changed my mind about it," but we didn't. And I'm actually glad they kind of just did that with looks or whatever. Like, oh, okay, he's coming around. He gets it.
He said it with Captain. That was it. That was your payoff. Is pause, Captain.
And I guess my thing was, and this isn't perfectly analogous, but it's very much like Galileo 7, where all of a sudden everyone's like, "Well, Mr. Spock and your logic," and it's like, you guys, he's pretty good at this, and somehow this is his first command, which it wasn't. And I'm relitigating that episode, but which I shouldn't do. Still a good episode, and just like this one. But I was just like, do we need to do this one? Do we need to do this right now? If it was more, and again, maybe this gets to your point, Jimmy, where if we had more time with that, then you get into, well, the guy's mad because obviously he wanted to have command, which makes sense, and maybe we have a moment where he and Data talk about that, because Data. He picks up social cues now, right? I know we talk about this all the time, but maybe not. But yeah.
Well, he does whenever it suits the story too. Apparently,
right?
That's or the writer's preference or whatever.
To be fair, I'm the same way in real life.
So this was Lieutenant Commander Christopher Hobson, as you're talking about, that as Data's first officer, played by Timothy Carhart. He's best known for The Hunt for Red October, Thelma and Louise, Beverly Hills Cop 3, Ghostbusters. He recently did an arc on Yellowstone. So he's been around a bit. Yeah, the character was generic and underdeveloped, and so it's really hard to judge whether he did a good job or not. I get Steven's point of it being repetitious because we've already had Data defend his personhood, but I do understand why we have characters that question an android's ability, even though he has apparently 26 years of Starfleet service, which was an interesting tidbit to learn, because it seems longer than it seems like Data would have been further along after 26 years. But what was interesting to me about that plot was him, first of all, calling Picard on it, because Picard was doing the unconscious bias of just not even, I mean, Data's his third in command after Riker. You gotta give him some command time, and he has the night shift and he's ready for this. And I really enjoyed his command style, which didn't emulate Picard or Riker, but kind of was his own thing. And I appreciated that he has developed that over time. And that is an interesting story to me. But yeah, couching it in the prejudice and stuff was a little tired and a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, I think it was more about, and I guess getting the respect of your crew is a part of becoming a captain and and all that, and the struggles that could be. But it just,
I was just, as you were talking, I thought about it some more, and it was probably a more overt and probably timely in the sense of the things we've discussed these days as far as people of color in these kinds of positions.
Yeah.
I mean, that is very much like the micro and macro aggressions you would get. And his command style was different because it had to be, it was forced to be different because he had to respond to these kinds of, that type of resistance that a Riker or Picard wouldn't get.
Yeah, that's fair.
Don't you think if Hobson is a decent Starfleet officer and he knows he's being assigned this new commander, even if he only has a little bit of warning, he'd read Data's file a little bit and be impressed with all the things Data's done? I feel like that kind of career record, like I said, 26 years, and especially in the last 4 that we've seen, Data's had a chance to distinguish himself somewhat. And you can be wary of Data for legitimate reasons, like, hey, this guy's gone crazy and taken over the ship twice. Are we sure we want to put him in command? Things like that. But just the fact he's an android, it's maybe, like, no, he's an officer. He's got a record. Look at his record and then judge. Don't just judge on this one thing.
The point is that's what would happen in real life. It's not going to be for a person like that. You're not going to have like an episode that happens in their life and then it's just solved for the rest of their lives. And then you're still going to keep running into people like that.
Sure.
You're going to have people with confirmation bias, even if they did look at the record, they would assume that it's like he's a token hire, essentially. That's the way he would treat him.
I think maybe, Jimmy, he did look at his record and he only saw the times he went crazy and took over his ship. And he thought this was another incident of that. But yeah, that's a good.
I did like Data denying his transfer. I thought that was a great little bit.
They hooked me again on that one too as well.
If they present, and I and I get where you're coming from, Keith, and that makes sense. But also, the motion picture, we get why Decker is like, everyone knows Kirk is the greatest, but even he's still like, you don't know what, you haven't been around. I've been here for every part of the ship. I know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So you get Decker being like, man, this is jive, and I agree with him.
Agree with him in what way?
Oh, I think in motion picture, I think Decker's right. He probably should be in charge because Kirk makes a couple mistakes. Now, eventually he gets back on his game once Spock shows up and all that. But initially, I don't think it's the right decision. Wrath of Khan, right decision. Motion picture, probably not the right decision.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we get a scene of Klingons partying together because apparently, even though they're fighting over control of the planet, the capital city where control of the planet is determined is somehow a neutral territory, and you're supposed to be able to just show up and drink with your enemies, which is a little bit odd, but then also, I guess, if the Klingons have as warlike a society as we've been presented with, then you do need some neutral ground to let off steam where you don't have to be afraid of being murdered. Just having your hand stabbed when you arm wrestle, because apparently you stick daggers on stands on either side of it.
I wrote it's Klingon cheers. We're here, we're all warriors. Or I know that's more of a Olive Garden tagline. So maybe this is the Klingon Olive Garden. But it also reminded me of the bar scene in Airplane, fighting and stabbing, and the Girl Scouts are having a knife fight. I've complained often about the Klingons, and also said, well, you know what? They're different, and it's not my style or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I should be more accepting. And then for whatever reason, watching this 2-3 minute scene, I'm like, okay, you know what? I get it. That's the way these guys are they're just different. This is what they do. It wouldn't be my place. I would not go to Klingon cheers, but I kind of get it. Was that a headbutting competition that they were doing?
It looked like it. Yeah. There's like a fist fighting one, or like just a trading punches. And one looked like maybe they were trading headbutts. So I listen to the Sklar's Brothers podcast. I'm big fans of those guys. I see them when they come around. They did a show called Cheap Seats, where they would watch sporting events, sometimes silly, sometimes not silly, and kind of MST3K it. And they started doing their own. They've got a Patreon going on. The first one was a slapping contest. So I'm like, they should do a Klingon headbutting contest. Then that's a natural for them. But yeah. Well, since you mentioned sports, this was my first note, actually, noting the bar scene, and I was fascinated in similar ways, but I compared it to like rival sport teams being in the same bar or something like that. It was kind of a like good sportsman too about it. I mean, not necessarily. It seemed like there was I want to use the word outlet, but an established kind of rule system to allow them to engage in a certain way that was healthy and by their standards. And I thought that was refreshing in some ways.
And the old timers hate it, sticking with the sports thing where, you play for 40 minutes or however many minutes, whatever sport it is. And at the end, everyone's like shaking a hand, especially football, basketball. They're on the court or the field saying, okay, I'll see you next time, whatever, how you been, how the wife and kids. And, sometimes there's prayer circles and all that kind of stuff, which, some of the old timers like, you got to hate those guys. I played pickup basketball every weekend for 10 years, 15 years with my best friends. And I wanted to kill those guys for a couple hours. And then when we were done, I'm like, let's go do whatever we're going to do. But for those 2 hours, I was super competitive and an a-hole, lack of a better term, if things weren't going right for me, especially. So I think that from that perspective, I think it makes sense too. And I that's why whenever it was like, well, I don't understand them shaking hands with the guy on the other team. I'm like, you could definitely want to kill that guy for an hour and then still be friends with him. So yeah, that's my sports contribution to this. The Klingons. So I understand the Klingons.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're not.
So O'Brien is back at Tactical, which he never served at the Enterprise, but we learned in an earlier episode he did on another ship.
That's right.
So I guess that's a natural fit go transporter to tactical, even though it's like he left that job for a reason. Why are you forcing him back into it? There's nobody else in the security department that can serve, that you have to pull your transporter chief to do it. Even though I'm not complaining about getting O'Brien in the episode. I'm just complaining about the realism of him being in that position. The first scene with Sela, where she's like talking and stuff, I'm like, I already like Sela better than I like Yar. I kind of wish Denise Crosby got to play her more. I find the character interesting. And that's kind of my alternate episode, was she describes this whole thing of what happened with Yar. And we'll get to some other aspects of that as we go. But my alternate episode is, man, if this was a serialized story, we could have seen that over the course of a season. And that might have been a really interesting story for Denise Crosby, where I would have grown to like Yar if we would have seen that dramatized. And then, you know, when that arc was over, like, you could have Worf off the ship for a season and follow his Klingon journey in a serialized way.
I think you're right. I think that storyline is one of the ones where we got shortchanged, where I wanted more out of that one. I mean, it's a Yesterday's Enterprise reference, right? The whole sending her back and all that. Yes. And I guess it makes sense, but
major props for them for developing this Romulan character and building off of Yesterday's Enterprise, which none of our crew even remember. Like, that's some good thinking.
Yeah, so that was my second of three notes actually about this, was just I was freaking out because I had totally forgotten about that storyline. They just dropped it in there, and it's just they brought that back, and I was so impressed. And it gave me a lot to think about. With just they didn't like club you to death with it either. It's just sort of like they expected you to either go back and watch the episode, which you probably couldn't have done really that back then very easily, but you know, to have been following to the extent that you might have picked up on it. And you know, it explains just enough to make me start thinking about the implications of how time travel was working there, the way the timelines were merging.
So I thought it was clunky the way they handled it. It was clunky when Guinan comes in and tells Picard, like, hey, this conversation I did not witness, and this woman I did not see on the bridge. By the way, she's telling the truth, but I'm not going to give you any details about it because I don't know him. I'm just telling you she's telling the truth, and you just need to believe me. And it's just like,
well, it's fair in the sense that, yes, it's probably a symptom of having too many things packed into the episode, as you were saying earlier.
Well, and just she's like, Picard, you're responsible for this. So you have to, and I like that coming back around that he's responsible for something he doesn't even remember. But again, the way it was handled, and I disagree with Keith that you have to go back and watch the episode, because I feel like they tried to tell you everything that happened in this one to its detriment.
That's not what I mean in the sense of like, I think that they necessarily had to give you that much information because they probably wouldn't have expected you to do it. But if you had, this would have been oh my God, they did this. What I was going to ask was which of you knew that this was going to happen? I assume that Jimmy probably already knew the answer to who she was.
I didn't know. So when she dropped that, I always assume they're lying. And I was like, do what now? What's that? I was like them, like, that doesn't make sense. And then when they got in the Yesterday's Enterprise, but before they explained it, I'm like, if you believe it, it's not a lie. That's the first Seinfeld reference today. I forgot about the whole Guinan thing, her coming in and kind of illustrating it.
And the fact that she never met Yar, they bring up again too, which is the further complication in her story. And
I guess maybe it adds to the mystery or intrigue about Guinan, whatever her powers are. I thought when Sela got in her backstory, her whole thing of being mad at Tasha because she was a traitor to the father because he took mercy on her and didn't kill her. That was some gymnastics, and that was some victim blaming to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what the culture would be like.
Yeah, and so, I get.
She was raised by this father. That story will have been twisted. For all we know, she cried out just as a reaction, and now that story's been told so much that this is the truth she believes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe eventually it leads to her. This is still part of her revenge against the Romulans, and eventually she will destroy them in some way.
That would have been a good thing to do.
Yeah. This is not the last time we see Sela, so we are going to get some more Sela.
I thought you were saying we did. That was last time.
No, okay. we get to see Sela again. So and we get to see the Duras sisters again, thankfully, because I felt they were shortchanged in this episode.
They were fun when we had them. whenever they were around, they were a lot of fun.
So if I had seen this, I had completely forgotten that was what the answer was going to be. So I was going along with the crew going, wait, that can't happen. And then, well, maybe she's a clone. That seemed like the thing they were going to do next. And then the explanation, as I said, I really appreciated. So I think that really blew away the other things, that the clunkiness, as you were saying. But I mean, I seem to recall that Guinan was a part of yesterday's Enterprise in some way, right? Like she was on the future other timeline. And so they used her as another device in that other episode to, right? Didn't she? Or
yeah, she was the one who knew things were wrong and they needed to fix the timeline. Yeah.
Does this mean the Romulan commander, and by Romulan commander, I mean Mark Leonard, because this is my obligatory balance of terror moment. Is he somehow related to Sarek, and there was some kind of time glitch there too?
I mean, it's possible, but it's never been canonized.
I only say that because I was like, Mark Leonard and Denise Crosby, are they similar in that they both got to play Romulan commanders of some kind? They both also played another major character, and I don't think there's anyone else. Like William Campbell played Trelane, and he also played Koloth on Trouble with Tribbles. But I was trying to think of anyone else who's played two. I mean, Sela, Hal Major, I don't know. I mean, Leonard's Romulan commander in Balanced Terror. It's one episode, but it's a big episode. So it's not perfectly analogous, by anyway, because Sarek obviously is a bigger legend than Tasha Yar, of course.
Yeah,
but
no, it's certainly plenty of actors that have played multiple roles in Star Trek, but it's rare that they're related, unless like it's Brett Spiner, because he plays like 5 different characters that are related to Data.
That's true.
But Tasha Yar, the Sela thing is, I mean, her daughter looks just like her, except for the ears, which we saw in this episode. She had partial Romulan ears.
Spoiler alert, next week we will also have
partial Romulan ears.
Second Star Trek character.
Yeah.
We'll get into that next week.
Sela's timing of her reveal to the Enterprise crew who she was felt kind of odd. Like, I figure she'd save it for a key moment of battle when she needed to get the one up on him. But it seemed like, because then she just beams over with no precautionary measures and no qualms about it. It seemed like her whole point of being around right here was she had something to settle with the Enterprise over her mother. It felt like she was anxious to talk to them and wanted to communicate and encounter them, not just being there because they were in her way.
So are you saying that reconciles the oddness for the strangeness for you when you thought about it later?
No, because they don't fully give a good reason why she needs to confront them, because she hates her mother. And I don't know. It was all a little weak. I like the backstory, but I thought her inclusion in this episode was also fine. It was the way they inserted her in the second part and the way she interacted with the Enterprise felt a little off.
I guess it played differently for me. I was just going to say that it seemed more in keeping with the way that Picard and some of the other officers had been interacting with the Romulans up to this point. The good Cold War kind of interaction. I think that she expected, as Picard was surmising, that she was dropping it as a psychological advantage. She was just dropping it in so casually, like it's something to mess with them for a while. And then she needed to follow up. And the kinds of questions they were asking each other were really more about, I think that she wanted to rattle him to the point where he was going to reveal. Sorry, they were playing that cat and mouse thing about the barrier, about the sensor thing during that. And that felt like anything that any other Romulan officer would have done in her position. So I think the physical presence was just, it's like a competence move. It's a power move. We're not at war. What do I have to worry about? Let's come right over and let's talk in the conference room. What's going on? Nothing. Really? Do you think that something,
Did she announce that she's Tasha's daughter when they're face to face?
Yeah.
She did it. Okay. She did it on the view screen first.
On the view screen first, and then she explains it when they're face to face.
Yeah, because I would have liked somebody or two of the crew members to be like, I knew it. And then there's an exchange of money. Because that looks just like
that's the Orville. That would have been the Orville.
Yeah.
Gordon would have had a bet.
Yeah. If Sela should be mad at anyone, it should be her hairdresser, because that hair is terrible. And that is my fashion note. I have one other one, but I'll say that for later.
That and her uniform doesn't fit. I mean, no Romulan uniform really fits, but this one really doesn't fit.
She should kill both those people.
I think the hairdresser, that's just the common style for Romulans. So
yeah.
How is that net that the barrier net that they're doing work? Because
I was going to ask the same thing.
Go around it.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Instead of through it. And if it's so big that she has to go through it, or else it takes way too long to go around, then how do these ships expect to catch whatever goes through it? Because they have to be spread out so much that by the time they get to whatever goes through it, it would defeat the whole purpose. So the whole thing made no sense to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, the second part, there's an explanation for. Sorry, Stephen, did you want to?
I was just going to say, the whole tachyon thing, I love that they always find cloaking device loopholes. There's that. There's to use their energy or to fire their weapons. There's ways around, which, again, I think it develops interesting strategies, wartime strategies, balance of terror kind of stuff. Again, I'll mention balance of terror. And then, you guys have already gotten ahead to my next point, which is space blockades. How do they do those?
Right.
Like I get it on Star Wars or any other one where they're blockading a planet and you're around the planet, But
I think they are in this case, or at least that's what I thought.
Is that, but if you're like, we're going to blockade the planet, no one can come in or out, that's one thing. But this is just, we will not let you pass through this.
Well, all right. So
neutral zone.
Let's start with the second part that Jimmy was saying. We saw at the end the confirmation of how it was supposed to work. This was again like a Cold War game. It was essentially proving that the Romulans were even trying to get there to begin with, or that they were making contact or surreptitiously trying to get to the planet in some fashion. So once
to stop them, they wanted to expose them.
Yes.
That was the whole goal.
Right. Yeah. So once they get through and you go, oh, we caught you. That was it. When we saw at the end, game over. So was it a planet? First of all, Jimmy, do you remember?
What do you mean a planet?
Where were they what was point B? What were they trying to get to exactly?
They were trying to get to the Duras fleet to give them supplies.
I don't know. Yeah. I was hoping that maybe you saw a picture or something that I was looking away from, or they give you like a diagram for like how everything's laid out. And is the net a globe? I mean, you could do that theoretically.
Odd shape. It was an odd shape. It didn't make any sense. So Worf is easily beaten up and captured by the Duras sisters, which, they can beat up and capture me anytime they want.
So I was glancing away then too, and I was confused because I thought that was just some of Worf's comrades getting angry at him because his brother had just walked away. And I thought that they were like, yeah, what he said. Don't you dare go against our captain. Bam. And it was just, no. Did they indicate that before?
It was supposed to be in the neutral area where you're not supposed to take your enemy.
Okay. So they weren't like back in the ship.
That shows how dishonorable the Durases are.
When they mentioned him being mated to Bator, I was like, there are worse things. There are worse things in this galaxy than being mated to her.
I don't know how Worf resisted that temptation.
I don't either. I do not either.
But then while he's still their captive, Sela comes on the screen and talks to him, and Worf has absolutely no reaction to her appearance or her voice. Even if he doesn't see the screen, because I wasn't sure he saw it. He knows her voice. This is a woman he served very closely with, and he had no reaction whatsoever. That rang very hollow to me.
Did he see her, though? Did we see her?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know if he saw her, but he definitely heard her because he was in the room and she was talking pretty loud.
I don't know. If someone had been dead for, how long has it been? I don't know how many years. And somebody you served with you and you're not expecting to see them or hear. I mean, you wouldn't go, hey, you sound exactly like that person I used to work with 3 years ago. You must be alive. What's going on?
First of all, I think her voice is relatively distinctive.
Mine?
Second of all, even if he just hears the voice and he just sounds like it, you're right, he might not say anything, but he'd at least turn and look and see like, that sounds like, wait a second, that looks like you. It just
I don't know.
It didn't make sense for Worf to be in the room while they talked to Sela and there would be no reaction. Sela avoids Picard's trap and seems to know everything about the Sutherland. She's like, oh, that's that ship that android's captain of, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how does she know that? I know the Romulans are good at spying, but it seemed like she had way more information than she should.
Didn't they drop something about wasn't Picard talking about that earlier in the episode? Like maybe there was some other inside help from Did he say Starfleet necessarily? I mean, it felt like he was hinting at it.
No, they were working with the Klingons, not Starfleet.
No, but my point was he was saying something like they needed even more help to do something or other. Like he was implying there was more to it than just the Klingons.
I didn't catch that. I thought he was just still talking about that the Duroses had the extra help, or else they wouldn't have been able to successfully stage the Civil War.
I enjoyed the length she went to not say it's a trap. She went several sentences. I'm like, just say it, just say it, just say it, and she did.
I didn't. That's interesting. You think they purposefully avoided it?
I wrote it's a trap in my notes first, and then went back to say long way around saying it's a trap.
So Data, when he's seeing through her trap or her scheme to get past the trap, he actually seems angry, and he makes no attempt to explain himself. I get why he doesn't stop to explain himself to that annoying first officer, but Picard's calling, and he's not saying anything anyway. He can talk to Picard while he's working.
Right. I didn't understand that.
There's no reason. And then when he submits himself for discipline to Picard, it's like, why? Why not just explain to him what's going on? Like, hey, Captain, can I have 1 minute? Even if you don't want to go into it all. Captain, this is important. Give me 1 minute. Picard would be like, sure, I trust your judgment. And then you don't have to submit yourself for discipline.
Yeah, I was curious. That part, and I'll raise another sports thing here, but I mean, I think obviously he was right. I wrote down Data was right. Tell your Data he was right. But there is, and I think Data, that's why he goes and says, I did things the wrong way, even though they turned out right. And that's another sports thing, where, just to use a football analogy, it's like, well, there's this time-worn thing. If you're on the 2-yard line and it's 4th down, well, you got to get those points. You got to kick the field goal, an easy field goal. But all the math tells you should go for a touchdown. But sometimes they kick the field goal and it turns out they end up winning, and other times they go for the touchdown and they don't. But even though, so it's that ends versus the means or the process kind of thing. So people make the right decision, turns out wrong. They don't execute it right, and vice versa. They make the wrong decision, turns out right. And I thought to me, that's kind of what Data was saying, was like, yeah, I did the right thing, but I didn't do it the right. I didn't go about it the right way. It's a little different, but but Picard was just like, well, you won the game, so who cares? See you next week.
See you next week. There are a couple of things about what Jimmy was saying. I think you could look at it a couple of ways. One, that this is just cynically speaking, this is just a thing they threw into the story for dramatic effect, which is probably the most likely answer. Yeah. The other is that it really was that time sensitive. I mean, this guy is already wasting enough time. This Hobbs, was it? Hobson, yeah. Already wasting so many precious seconds. Right. If you're having to do this kind of maneuver, please shut up and do it. Please shut up and do it. No, I can answer the phone right now. This other thing is, I mean, I can see the natural extension of that.
Yeah. Can't talk now. Star shipping.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I don't blame him for blowing Hobson off. I don't understand why he blew Picard off.
I'm just saying for the same reason, if there were precious seconds being wasted, as there already had been, I mean, that there could have been just that minute, I don't know.
It's Hobson's fault.
Okay.
That's Hobson's law, isn't it? Isn't that Hobson?
Yes. But
the Duras sisters sure give up pretty easily just because they didn't get some shipment to them. Gowron's victory seemed way too easy. And then the Duras sisters just beam away and leave the boy, which also seems dumb. It just felt like we're at the end of the episode. We got to tie things up really quick. Let's go ahead and finish this. And I know the Duras sisters are going to come back for revenge later because they want revenge, but it's still, it's the wrath of the Duras sisters. Yeah. But it still all felt way too easy and too quick.
I wrote, I think for that I wrote Klingon way or the highway. It's the Klingon way or the highway, and they took the highway and got out.
And Picard, of course, submitted the report to the Klingons, so apparently that fixed everything.
So who's redeemed at the end? Everybody?
Worf?
No, not everybody.
Well, Worf was redeemed in part 1 because he got his honor back.
He got commended or whatever.
Right. And I guess in part 2, Gowron's redeemed because the Klingons split whether he should be in charge of Duras, but then once they exposed the Duras connection to the Romulans, now all the Klingons are falling in line behind him.
He's redeemed. Data's redeemed.
Data's redeemed. from something he never did? Just
from prejudice.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, it's unfair, but that's how it works.
And Worf at the end spares the Duras boy, and I get that because that's very Worf, even if it doesn't fit his people. And there's a lot about Worf not fitting in this episode.
Yeah.
But then when he turns to Picard and he's like, and Picard just gives him his job back after he quit and served on a Klingon ship.
More
again,
redemption.
Feels too quick and easy.
Uh-huh.
Well, no, these are all good points. I mean, it's just we know it's because of we have to get back to our regularly scheduled filler. Well, okay, not filler. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think they need to give Worf 15 seconds to say, "Hey, I tried this. I'm not fitting in here. It's clear I don't belong here. Can I come home?" And that would have made that ring a lot more true. Yeah. I mean, say that in Worf speak, obviously,
right?
But he could make that clear to Picard, and he doesn't even try. I guess
I was just touched more by the way you said it than the way he said it in the episode.
I guess we're just supposed to believe that Picard already knows all that about him, and I do think he does, but I still think Washington said something.
That was going to be my thought too. It didn't seem like it felt like they gave enough of a glance that meant that Picard had surmised these things from actually just that interaction. Just Picard there to witness him having to be put in a position where he had to decide not to kill this boy, and it was challenged. Obviously, it's like, okay, I see where you're coming from. Worf is like, I'm out now. I'm done with this. Mm-hmm. I see why you're done with this. Let's just go. But then again, cynically, yes, behind they're shoehorning these things in. Right. They would have had to cut something else earlier that they didn't cut, and so they're just here we go.
Yeah, at this point, between this Worf quitting here just because he didn't agree with Starfleet politics, and then coming back, and then him murdering Duras while still a Starfleet officer. With both of those things, now I was always curious why it took Worf so long to get promoted when Geordi got promoted right away when he became a department head. But now after witnessing these events, because I hadn't seen this two-parter before, now I'm left wondering, why did Worf ever get promoted in the first, eventually?
Wow.
I feel like it should take him 10 more years to earn the next promotion. And instead, in 3 years, they're going to give in and promote him. And I'm like...
So he should be discommendated in Starfleet as well, you're saying? Or
I'm just saying...
He's going to be working in 10 forward.
No, I'm not saying he shouldn't get to keep his job. I'm just saying I would think long and hard about giving him a promotion, and I feel like it should send him back even further than it does.
I did like the end with Picard and Worf walking out, which was a callback to when they walked out in the... What was the name? I should know the name of that episode. We loved it. When he's discommendated and walks out. It's not Code of Honor, because that's the episode we hated.
No, it's the one where Kalar dies. Yeah. Give me half a second and I'll tell you what it is.
A Matter of Honor? Something.
In the meantime, I'll talk more about Klingons. I think it's the sisters that say, I hope he dies well. Is that them?
No, that was Gowron.
Gowron. Is I hope he dies well the Klingon version of Live Long and Prosper?
Perhaps.
Reunion was... sorry, no. Sins of the Father was when he was discomminated. Reunion was Kalar died.
Okay.
One of those things fits better than the other.
My one other fashion was Klingon cleavage, and that cleavage is spelled with a K. I felt like there was even more this time.
I like that way more than I should.
You can see how I'm coming around to the Klingon way of life.
Just toss a couple of Klingon sisters in front of Steven, and all of a sudden he's a Klingon convert.
Soon I'll be speaking Klingon on half of these podcasts. Actually, while we're there, that's all my notes, but my alternate episode is the Duras sisters in a version of White Christmas, where they sing the sisters, and then Worf and Gowron play the Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye parts. Yeah, that is my alternate episode. It's a musical. And they're in space. It's White Christmas in space. This is my alternate episode.
So I know how you feel about female Klingons. Yeah. You might have to wait a while, but in Voyager, there's a main character who is the chief engineer, and she's half human, half Klingon. So she's kind of like Kalar. I mean, she wears Starfleet uniform. She doesn't wear the cleavage barring thing, but she is attractive. And she is, If you want a Klingon woman, she's got the Klingon temper. I'll tell you that.
Fair enough. There's some women I've dealt with that have similar temperaments, but I might be the cause of that, actually.
Beat me to that punchline as well, I think. That's great.
There were lots of empty stations on Data's bridge, and the screens behind him looked completely unusable. The design did not look useful. It looked like it was supposed to look.
It's because they were being fixed, renovated.
It was more cramped too, right? It was a more cramped bridge.
It was much more cramped. Yeah. Well, but the Enterprise D is like the huge vessel, and most of these vessels are smaller.
Oh,
but it still felt weird.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like most of the vessels we see have such small bridges because you only have the budget for the big bridge for your starring ships. So everything else has to be smaller.
It's like the version of, it's like when you get a compact car. It doesn't have any of the frills with it. You have to actually roll down the windows on that starship. You can't, it's not electronic.
To put your elbow out. I was joking about the repairs before, but I mean, do you think that they were purposely trying to make it look unusual for that to get the effect that this isn't ready yet or something? Or
no, I think they just had a bad design because they were trying to make it look like a cool bridge, but you only had this little glimpse of it, and it was clearly a redressed set.
It also only had a cassette player for the stereo. Didn't even have a CD player.
It was an plastic, the converter to plug into the. Oh God! So you can plug in the view screen that way or something, or.
So I did want to mention there was a guest star who played Kluge. I'm not even sure who Kluge was. Obviously a Klingon. Jordan Lund played him, but Jordan Lund, who's best known for Fletch Lives, Lock Up, and Mercy Point, will play a different character in Deep Space Nine and a different character in Enterprise. He'll be back a couple of times.
Lock Up, the Stallone movie I haven't thought about in a very long time, I guess. Oh my God.
He was a cop in Fletch Lives. I remember him now, yeah. The guy that played Larg, the guy at the bar at the Klingon Cheers, he's been in everything. But he was also in the Seinfeld episode. The Raincoats. Yeah, Michael Haggerty. Yeah, he was in the So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Wayne's World, Overboard, Inspector Gadget.
He was also in an episode of Cheers. He was recently in an episode of He was in a couple episodes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine as one of their captain, as their old captain. And he was in The Raincoats, which was also a two-parter on Seinfeld.
He returns in season 7 as a different character as well. The episode was directed by David Carson, who will direct the film Star Trek Generations. He also directed From Earth to the Moon, Blood Wedding, Boat 2142, a number of different films.
Blood Wedding.
And a few episodes of Smallville.
Huh.
But yeah, this was, in terms of directing Star Trek, he directed 4 episodes. This was the third of 4. He also directed Yesterday's Enterprise. He'll direct 4 episodes of DS9 as well. And then the last note I have here is I got excited when I heard Riker and Geordi were going to the Excalibur. We've talked about Star Trek New Frontier before, which is a book series that was never with a captain that was never on screen. That was the first Star Trek book series with a new crew. And we talked about Dr. Salar as the chief medical officer on there, and a bunch of the characters go over. The Excalibur is his ship. Shelby's his first officer. And in next week's episode, we meet another one of his crewmen in the book series. So we'll talk about that next week. But I love seeing the pieces come together for New Frontier, because I think New Frontier came about shortly after Next Gen went off the air, or right before it went off the air. And so it built all these different elements in Next Gen. And every time I see one come into play, I'm like, yep, nice. Love it. You guys got any more notes before we rank?
I am all out of notes.
I only had 3.
Okay, then. I have so few notes for next week. It's ridiculous. Might be the least number of notes I've ever taken.
I've got 7 for the next one.
I have more than I thought I did.
Probably 7.5 or 8, really, but we'll see.
So who is your annoyance in Redemption 2?
Hobson, of course. It's just like there's just
that's a better one. I went with Sela because of her victim blaming. Her hair.
That's good too.
Oof. I have to go with Hobson because while I'm frustrated with a number of the characters, none of them are as bad as Hobson. So
that was just so much.
Yeah, it was bad.
And that's kind of that actor's speciality. I mean, I immediately thought of him in Ghostbusters when he's the violinist.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God! Oh, that.
Who do you want to have a drink with from this episode?
B'Etor. Is that right? B'Etor. Yeah.
B'Etor.
Yeah, I'm gonna be shallow, and I think I got a shot with her.
I mean, I'm going to choose her for the second episode in a row because, when she kidnapped Worf and had him down on the table, that's like definitely a fantasy of mine. And I think we would then have a drink together and talk about it. Keith?
Oh, probably Sela.
All right.
She is the superior Denise Crosby character in the series.
Yeah,
I'll probably say that to her, and she would get very confused. But
where do we want to rank this episode? I'm going to start at the bottom.
Yep, I think that's where it belongs.
Also, I'm going to put it at the top.
I agree.
Okay, great.
I think we should split the difference. But
next week, Darmok. Picard must learn to communicate with a race that speaks in metaphor under a difficult set of circumstances. Darmok's a pretty iconic episode, widely regarded as a solid, good episode.
Mm-hmm.
And it's rated 8.7 out of 10 on IABD.
Yeah.
We will get to that next week. Until then, live long.
And I hope you die well.
And scream in the background.
That's my daughter.
It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?